Thanks for joining us here on this Ecocraft chat. I'm Tammy Sutherland. I'm the director of the Manitoba Arts Council, and I'm coming today from C2 Center for Craft. We're located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And our water here comes from Shoal Lake. So welcome everyone. We're so pleased to present our chat today with artist Tibor Bodi and our scientist partner, Madison Harasyn. So we're gonna get right into it. Both of these folks have been involved for the last year and a half or so in a project called Ecocraft. The exhibition is showing right now at the C2 Center for Craft. So yeah, we just want to give a chance to go a little deeper into each of the artworks and each of the collaborations and find out a little bit more kind of what that was like behind the scenes and what the work's all about. So maybe we'll start with you, Madison. Can you tell us a bit about your research and just what brought you to Ecocraft?
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. So I am a drone technician in general. So I do a whole bunch of projects that use drones to look at the Earth's surface and Earth processes. So back when I started with Tibor working on this project, I was working at the University of Manitoba, and there I was a research associate for the at CIOS. So there I was using drones in a variety of different projects. A couple projects I worked using drones to look at belugas and their movement around kayaks, around tourism and boats in the area. As well, I used drones to look at sea ice in Hudson Bay and look at the concentration of melt ponds on the surface, as well as flow sizes in Hudson Bay. And currently, I'm working out in Canmore. So I'm using drones to monitor the snowpack and glacier melt in the Canadian Rockies, and that's through the University of Saskatchewan. But the project that interested Tibor the most was a project where I used drones to monitor algae blooms in Manitoba waterways. Specifically, we were looking at, there was 2 retention ponds on the University of Manitoba campus. And me and a master's student that I work closely with, Ago Fisher, we went out and we collected samples of the water, as well as we flew the drone overhead to monitor the algae blooms that were happening throughout the summer in the 2 different ponds. And one pond was naturalized, and then one pond was a little bit more unnaturalized. There was like a really rocky coastline, and you could really tell the difference of algae blooms in both ponds. So Tibor really was drawn to this project, and I brought him along for the experience, and he really created an interesting piece out of this work.
Very cool. One question that occurred to me just as you were talking now is, what does naturalized mean in a pond environment?
Yeah, so the naturalized pond, I wish I had photos of them, but there was reeds along the coastline of the pond, and you could tell just by being in the pond. We would take a boat out to the center of each of the ponds to collect our samples. You could tell how much wildlife, and as well as like fish, were in the pond, and I think it mainly had to do with the coastline and the vegetation surrounding the pond, which kind of filtered the water going into the pond, versus the one that was just kind of this big rocky coastline that there was no vegetation around. And the algae just kind of went crazy in that pond, and it was pretty gross to stick your hand in and get a sample of it. So you could definitely tell the difference.
Okay, thanks for that. Tibor, so let's go back in time just a little bit, because obviously when you first joined this project, you weren't sure who you would be matched with. So can you just tell us a little bit about what interested you in this project, and then how the collaboration started and unfolded for you?
Well, certainly, just going back, my own interest in anything from sustainable eatware to glaciations, which I've been monitoring out in the Canadian Rockies for the past 10 years. So I've been pretty conscious on a general level of what's going on with climate change, of course, quite concerned like everyone else. So when it came to this particular project, this initiative, and I think it's a very timely and complex initiative that the Manitoba Craft Council undertook, and then to hear that I might have a chance to work with a scientist who would take my level of knowledge much deeper than I can't have access anywhere else. But what I didn't expect is I learned so much through Maddie and the way she opened up this whole world of theirs, which is a very detailed, but it's also very exploratory in its nature. It has to be bomb-proof in terms of the results you provide at the end of the day, and it's usually long-term too. It's not something that you would do overnight. So I got quite immersed, and thanks to Maddie taking me out to the field, showing me her processes, how the drone flew, how it acquired very unique data that was so unusual in the general working situation of scientists who deal with climate change and how water is affected by climate change. So all of this was brand new to me. I got very excited immediately to the point where I was ready to photo document the whole thing, video document it, and almost create a TV series on it. But of course, thankfully, the collaborative process took place, and we started talking a lot about how do we distill all this complex process into a piece that could communicate to a viewer and get them stirred up about the issues.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, am I muted?
Sorry, that was me. Yeah, so I'm just curious what that looked like. Like, it sounds, Tibor, like you dove in and you found the research that Madison was doing that just totally fascinating. So how did that collaboration look? Like, how did you take what you were so excited about, what interested you, and how did the piece that you present in Ecocraft come about?
You know, thank goodness that we were allowed ample time to make that transition, to take something that's highly complex, very important at the same time, and how do you convert that into a visual statement that can stand on its own in a gallery setting and still stir the curiosity of a viewer and have it sort of explain itself. So I'm glad to see the image in front of us right now. This particular piece I've named Precious Pond, and for a number of reasons. One of them is that ponds reveal so much about our climate change situation. And the preciousness of ponds are absolutely vital to our ability to combat the climate change that are happening there. And I think Maddie will probably have some more information around that to make the point. So just to back up, really their work was in the field with the drone, and the drone is now, imagine how it must have been when scientists finally got a microscope to work with. So essentially a drone now is a tool that they had not had before. And the task that Maddie and Ago was trying to prove, and I think are proving, is that drones are so much more efficient than, let's say, what scientists have been able to use up to now, which has been satellite imagery, and of course in the field, sample collecting, going back to the lab, and then tracing and following things like algae bloom, for example, which are huge indicators of climate change. So their process is going to be quite valuable now that I think Ago is going to present a paper with their findings, but it has to be at the same time so succinct and so detailed and verifiable that it's almost like a relay race, that they are going to produce the paper they produce to say drones are more efficient, less expensive, more transportable, and yet the data that they collect, the visual data they collect, is equal to any lab results, taking samples from the field and taking to the lab and doing the analysis and then creating the outcomes from that. So this particular piece is trying to kind of capture the two very interesting parts of this project, meaning the pond, which is replicated here with glass waves. And then on top, you might see these colored, actually they are test tubes. And the test tubes have colored water in it to depict colors that are natural ponds, meaning the typical colors that we would see in there, the greens, the variations in greens. However, the transition in the piece goes to the toxic colors of ponds, where the bloom has taken hold and in fact is dangerous to life in the pond, as well as to us as well. And so that's where you see the transition. So try to capture both how ponds in the glass piece, but also the lab work and what the drones and lab work can offer us in terms of information about climate change.
Madison, when you first saw this piece by Tibor, or now, like, how can you see your research reflected in it? And can you just speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So something that Tibor didn't really mention, which kind of strikes me about his work, and I don't know if this was his intention, but the type of drone data that we collect is multispectral. So it's collected over a variety of different wavelengths. And then that's what we use to look at how the algae is blooming in the waterways and what species of algae are present. And I don't know if this was his intention, but while we were collaborating, I think it was a Zoom meeting, I was showing him different ways to display the drone data, and as well as satellite imagery. They do the same thing with satellites. So you can change the way that the imagery is displayed to kind of pull out different features in the imagery. And sometimes, a pond will look red, and the algae will be black or something, depending on how you display the data. So that's kind of what I saw out of his kind of production of what I gave him in terms of our collaboration. You can see the different colors in the test tubes, and that kind of represents the different ways that we could look at algae or see algae in ponds. And yeah, that's what struck me first. We had a collaboration in the lab itself. So I brought him to the lab, and he worked closely with Augo Fisher, the master's student, and they looked at a bunch of different lab techniques to look at algae under microscopes, and that's kind of where the test tubes come from. So I definitely see that presented in the piece as well.
So Tibor, if you were to be able to whisper in the ears of visitors about what it is that you want to what do you want people to take away from your piece? What kind of change would you like to see?
Well, I think certainly if there's enough curiosity by looking at this piece and wondering what is going on here. I see as a reference to water. The name of the piece is Precious Ponds. And of course, we see these colors on top in test tubes. So hopefully it creates intrigue enough to say, well, what's going on? So what I want to add to that is because not just this particular piece, but all the pieces are quite interesting and create curiosity in this exhibition by the Manitoba Craft Council. But equally important is perhaps the companion catalog that the Craft Council has created, which really bridges some of those questions. If the curiosity is there, then the next step is to explore, well, in fact, here's this particular piece is in there. But along with that is the explanation that we have just talked about in great detail, why and why is it important. And then, of course, there's Seema's curatorial comments on each piece as well, which puts it into the broader picture. So I think it's a very comprehensive way of evoking and creating interest in the public that does come and see it. And hopefully that's the piece that walks away. And the importance, I think, of art or sculpture or the craft pieces that we see in the exhibition is that, yes, we can hear mainstream reports by scientists, and we hear that on television or see maybe even a streaming output of a scientist describing the situation, or we might see it in a newspaper or magazine. But this is another way to reference it, but it's also a visual way when you're up close to these pieces of art to say, well, that's another way to remember and create curiosity. So it's really an important, in my mind, at least, it's an important way to get the message out yet another way.
Madison, I'm wondering, obviously this is a kind of unique thing for artists and scientists to work together. I'm wondering if there are ways that working on this project has changed your way of seeing your work, or what impact it's had on you as a scientist.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I actually just kind of wanted to follow up with what Tibor was saying. I've always been very interested in finding a way to disseminate science so it's available for the public. I think it's maybe the most important thing that we as scientists can do, or artists or any other form of media, because only so many people read scientific journals or scientific papers. It kind of stays within the scientific world, and it's kind of like we're all talking to each other as scientists, but we're not getting the message out to the general public. So it's always been an interest of mine, and this collaboration was exactly something that caught my interest right away, because it was a really unique way to kind of explain our scientific work to a more general art audience, and also to kind of get the message across of what we're doing, and maybe spark that interest to people who might not have looked into scientific research before, or anything about ponds, or didn't know anything about, say, climate change as a whole. And it kind of sparked that interest and got people to look into it a little bit further. So, if it changes the opinion of one person's, mindset, that's really worth it, in my opinion. Well,
I'm wondering, Tibor, where can people find a bit more of your work if they're looking to see what your practice is like?
Well, I have to admit, I'm not a high producer of art, but the pieces that I tend to get involved with are, well, for example, this particular project was in the making of almost a year, to the date when we first met Maddie, to the date of the exhibition. So it's so I'm more drawn to those kind of projects, and so I think the Manitoba, or the Canadian Crafts Federation, has some of my imagery of my portfolio up there. So that'd be one place to see it. And of course, I'm just hoping that people will be able to be exposed to not just my work, but also the exhibition's work, and that be my main and only interest and hope.
Yeah, well, on that note, Ecocraft is open at the C2 Center for Craft until October 29th. So yeah, the gallery's open Wednesday to Saturday, noon to 4. We're located at 329 Cumberland Avenue in Winnipeg. So we invite you to come out at any time. We'd love to have you. Also, if you aren't able to get to the show in person, we have a digital tour available on our YouTube channel starting tomorrow. So if you go to YouTube/Manitoba Craft Council, you'll find it there. And all of these chats with the Ecocraft artists and scientists are going up on the YouTube account as well. So check them out.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Tibor and Madison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.